that feeling. I think it happens to so many English learners.
Oh, yeah. What his feeling is that?
You're in a classroom,
Yeah.
right? And everything seems clear. You think you understand the grammar, the vocabulary.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
And then you step outside that classroom environment. You try to watch a movie, maybe a TV show, listen to a podcast, or just a real conversation.
Right. Real world stuff.
Exactly. Or maybe a speech like the one we're looking at today. And suddenly it's like the English you learn just evaporated.
Yeah, vanishes.
It sounds so fast. The words all run together. Sounds change. And you just struggle to keep up. That smooth, clear English from the textbook or maybe the teacher, it's just nowhere to be found out there in the wild.
That struggle is incredibly real. And honestly, it's incredibly common.
You think so?
Definitely. The difference between, carefully articulated, sometimes slightly slower classroom English and the way people actually speak naturally, fluently, it's massive.
It feels massive.
And it's not just about speed, though. Speed is definitely a factor. It's fundamentally about how the sounds of the language actually change when words are spoken together, rapidly, naturally.
Exactly. And that gap, that frustrating disconnect between knowing the rules on paper and understanding real-world speech, that's precisely what we're diving into today.
Good. It needs diving into.
Our mission really is to try and arm you with the insights to bridge that gap. We're going to go deep into the mechanics of how native speakers actually talk, the messy but actually predictable ways sounds connect, reduce, and transform.
And that predictability is key, right? It's not random chaos.
Not at all. And we're not just going to tell you about these patterns, we're going to show you them in action. We're using some fantastic material provided for this deep dive, which analyzed a real-world speech clip. It's from former President Barack Obama.
Oh, okay. That's good material.
Yeah, it's a great example because, it's formal speech, but it's still very natural. It gives us lots of these rich patterns to explore.
And using material like that is so valuable because it grounds these abstract linguistic ideas in concrete examples from actual authentic speech.
Right, not just made-up sentences.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
So we can systematically break down specific sentences, identify not just the vocabulary, though we'll cover that too, but focus really intently on the tricky pronunciation nuances, the grammar as it's actually used in context, and even decode a joke later on that completely hinges on understanding common English idioms.
Ooh, a joke. Okay. And just a note to you listening, if any of this feels challenging as we go through it, please know that's not a sign you're not learning.
Absolutely not.
It's actually a sign you're tackling the real challenge of spoken English. These patterns, the way words link up, the way sounds get reduced or even dropped, they are the secret code, you could say, of fast English.
The secret code. I like that.
Learning to recognize them is like getting the ultimate upgrade for your listening skills. And we're going to walk you through it step by step, showing you exactly what to listen for.
Yeah, we'll highlight the specific features that pop up in the source material, explain the sort of linguistic principles behind why they happen, and talk about the impact they have on understanding. Our goal is really to give you practical tools, things you can use to start hearing these patterns yourself in the English you encounter every day.
Okay, let's really unpack this then. We've kind of touched on it, but why? Why is understanding fast, natural, spoken English so much harder, often, than the English you might hear in a controlled learning environment? What is that fundamental difference?
Well, the core issue, I think, is that in natural fluent speech, words are very rarely pronounced in isolation, not like how they might be introduced in a textbook or maybe on a vocabulary list, right?
Right, one by one.
Exactly. When we speak quickly and smoothly, we connect words together, we reduce sounds that aren't absolutely crucial for the meaning, and sometimes sounds even change or disappear entirely just because of the sounds that are next to them.
So it's like a stream,
Yeah.
not individual brocks.
That's a great analogy. Think of it as a continuous stream rather than individual bricks laid out neatly.
So it's not just speaking faster then, it's the actual sound structure that changes.
Precisely. We use things linguists call connected speech reductions and the sort of strategic use of unstressed sounds. So instead of saying very clearly, I have, or going to the store, or walk ED,
Yeah.
we naturally produce sounds that are just much more efficient to say, like I've doing to the store, walked.
To the store. Right. I hear that too all the time.
You do.
Yeah.
And the difference might look small on paper. Just change it to two. But in the actual flow of speech, it's immense.
And I guess if your brain is listening for the full textbook pronunciation, like to for T-O, but what you actually hear is to, it might just skip right over it or struggle to figure out what word that was.
Precisely. That mismatch between the sound you expect to hear based on spelling, or maybe that careful classroom pronunciation,
Okay.
and the sound that's actually produced in rapid speech,
Yep.
that's a primary source of frustration for learners.
I can see why.
You know the word, you probably know the grammar, but you can't decode the sound because it's been transformed by the words around it and the speed of delivery.
So the goal of this deep dive then is to really put a spotlight on these specific transformations so you can consciously start listening for them.
Exactly. By understanding how these sounds change, you can improve your ability to map that stream of spoken sound back to the words and the meaning you already know. It's really about retraining your ear.
Retraining your ear. Okay. Let's dive into our first specific example then, using the material from the speech. The sentence is, I've ordered every federal agency to eliminate rules that don't make sense.
Okay, a good solid sentence.
Yeah, seems simple enough on the surface, right? But it's packed with examples of these natural speech patterns we're talking about. Let's start right at the very beginning.
All right, let's look at that first bit. I've.
Okay, so that's the contraction of I have, super common one. But how is it typically pronounced in, natural spoken English?
Well, as the material we're using highlights, it's almost always pronounced in a very unstressed way. It doesn't sound like I have E with a clear H sound and the full vowel in have.
No, it doesn't.
It reduces dramatically.
Yeah.
Often it sounds more like just the initial I, followed by a really soft V sound, almost blending directly into the next word.
Like I've ordered.
Exactly. I've ordered, not I have ordered. The vowel sound in have gets reduced to a very quick, weak sound, sometimes called a schwa, or it might even disappear entirely.
Wow.
And this happens with all the subjects, right? He's for he is, or he has, she's. Recognizing that these short sounds are just reduced forms of have is, or has is, like step one in processing fast speech.
So your brain needs to instantly know that I've just means I have.
Instantly, without even thinking about it.
So when we hear I've ordered, our brain has just milliseconds to process that I've is I have. That happens so fast for a native speaker, but I guess for a learner, that's a really crucial processing step that can take time.
Absolutely. And the frequency is so important here. Contractions like these, they are constant in everyday English. You just can't avoid them.
No escape.
So training your ear to recognize them instantly in their reduced form is really non-negotiable if you want good listening comprehension.
Got it. Non-negotiable. Okay, next word. Ordered. The material we have draws attention to the ed ending here. What's the point?
Yeah, the ed ending for past tense verbs, it's often a source of confusion because it can actually be pronounced in 3 different ways.
3 ways, okay.
It can sound like T, like in walked.
Walked T, okay.
Or it can sound like D, as in this word, ordered.
Ordered D, got it.
Or it can sound like ed, making an extra syllable, like in wanted or needed.
Wanted ed, okay.
So in ordered, because the verb stem order ends in a vowel sound R, the ending is just a D sound. And crucially, this D sound isn't a full extra syllable like in wanted. It's just a light ed sound attached right onto the end of the word order.
Yeah.
Order.
Ordered. Yeah, it's subtle. You definitely don't hear ordered it. It's just ordered, that light D.
Exactly. And this follows predictable rules based on the final sound of the verb stem. Voiced sounds like R, take a D. Voiceless sounds like K, take a T, and stems ending in T or D take the T. Learning these rules helps you anticipate the sound you're likely to hear.
That's helpful. Knowing the rule helps predict the sound.
Right. And just one more thing on that D in faster speech. That final D can sometimes blend or link into the next word if it starts with a vowel sound. Listening for that linking helps your brain chunk the sounds correctly.
Okay, good point. Moving on now to eliminate. The source material makes a really specific point about the word to here.
Yes. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, as you said. The word to. It's one of the most commonly reduced words in English, especially when it's part of an infinitive, like here to eliminate, or when it's used as a preposition before a noun or a pronoun.
Like go to the store.
Exactly. The standard full pronunciation is to, with a long ooh sound.
Yeah.
But in natural everyday speech, it's overwhelmingly reduced to using that weak neutral vowel sound, the schwa.
To, like, I need to go to the store, listen to me.
Exactly. We hear to constantly.
It's everywhere.
It is. It's incredibly common. And recognizing that to sound is the word to is crucial. However, and this is the fascinating part the material points out,
Yeah.
in this specific instance in the Obama speech we're analyzing,
Yeah.
he actually used the full unreduced pronunciation
Yeah.
to eliminate.
He said to eliminate, not to eliminate. That seems counterintuitive based on what you just said.
It is. It goes against the most common pattern. And this highlights a really vital point for learners. While reductions like to are pervasive, speakers, especially in more formal settings like a presidential address, perhaps they retain the option to use the full pronunciation.
Why would they do that?
Maybe for clarity or for emphasis on the action, eliminate. Or sometimes, well, sometimes it just happens unpredictably based on rhythm or personal style. The challenge for you, the learner, is that you have to be prepared to hear both forms. You can't only train your ear for ta and then get thrown off when you hear to.
Right. You need to recognize that to eliminate and to eliminate mean exactly the same thing. They refer to the same infinitive verb.
Precisely.
So, okay, it's not enough just to learn the reduced forms then. You have to know the standard forms, understand that the reduced forms are variations, and realize that sometimes, even when you expect a reduction, the standard form might pop up. How do you get better at hearing both? That sounds tricky.
It takes practice and exposure. Lots of exposure to different speakers in different contexts. Pay attention not just to what people say, but how they say it. You might notice, for instance, that formal speeches, lectures, maybe news broadcasts, tend to use slightly fewer reductions compared to a very casual conversation or, say, reality TV shows.
Okay, that makes sense.
And try actively listening for this specific to versus toe variation. Another good tip is to try saying the phrase both ways yourself. Really feel the difference in your mouth. And say to eliminate, then toe eliminate. That kind of active engagement can really improve your recognition when you hear it.
Great tip. Saying it helps you hear it. Okay, now let's look at the phrase near the end of the sentence. Don't make sense. The material points out something about the final consonant sounds here.
Yes, this is another huge area of connected speech that makes English sound fast and, well, sometimes difficult to segment. Often, when a word ends in certain consonant sounds, especially stops like T, D, K, G, P, B, and the very next word starts with another consonant sound. Native speakers often don't fully release the sound of that first consonant.
Don't release it. What does that mean?
It means the air is stopped but not exploded out. It's sometimes called unreleased consonants or stopped consonants.
Okay, like the T in don't and the K in make.
Exactly. In the phrase don't make sense, the T at the end of don't is typically not fully pronounced as a crisp T sound with that little puff of air you might expect. You might just hear the tongue go to the T position and stop the air, but not release it before moving to the M of make. So don't can sound more like don't.
Don't. Okay.
And the K sound in make is similar. Your tongue goes up to the back of your mouth into position for the K sound, but the air isn't fully released before you move straight into the N sound of sense. So make almost sounds like may, followed immediately by sense.
So don't make sense becomes something closer to don't make sense. Don't make sense. Is that right?
That's a really good approximation of how it often sounds, yes. Don't make sense.
Wow.
And this isn't about being lazy or sloppy. It's actually about efficiency and articulation. Fully releasing every single final consonant, especially before another consonant, would slow speech down quite a bit and make it sound very choppy, very unnatural.
Right.
By not fully releasing that sound or letting it blend, you create a much smoother transition between the words. It helps the speech flow.
And I guess, again, if you're listening hard for that final T and don't or that K and make, you might miss the connection entirely. You'd struggle to hear the words as a coherent phrase.
Absolutely. Your brain is waiting for a sound that isn't fully there, or at least it's there in a modified, unreleased form. This happens all the time. Think about phrases like hot dog.
Hot dog.
Do you really hear a strong T sound before the D? Usually it's stopped. Hot dog. Or big game.
Big game.
The G might be unreleased before the next G. Bait G. Or stop paying.
Stop paying.
The P is often unreleased.
Okay.
Like P. It's full of these. Practicing listening for this non-release or stop sound is really key. Try saying the word cat by itself.
Cat releases T.
Now say cat food.
Cat food. Stop.
See? You probably didn't release the T in cat fully before starting food.
Yeah.
Your tongue went there, stopped the air, but didn't explode it out.
Huh. You're right. I didn't even realize. Cat versus cat food. That's a fantastic practical way to feel it and hear it. Okay, very quickly on vocabulary before we leave this sentence. Eliminate.
Right. The material defines eliminate perfectly as to completely remove or get rid of.
Yeah, straightforward enough. And it notes a typical pattern. Eliminate, followed by a noun or a gerund, the ing form of a verb used as a noun.
Yes, you eliminate something. The examples provided in the source material are really good illustrations of this. You have, we eliminated plastic bags. Plastic bags is the noun being eliminated.
Okay.
Then we eliminated using plastic bags.
Yeah.
Here, using plastic bags is a gerund phrase acting as the noun object.
Got it. Using is the gerund.
Then you have examples like, Jennifer helps me eliminate my mistakes. Mistakes noun, and these lessons help me eliminate my mistakes. Mistakes noun now. It's always the verb eliminate, acting directly on the thing being removed or gotten rid of.
And the material also suggests get rid of as a common synonym. That seems really helpful because get rid of feels like a phrase learners encounter a lot.
It is. Get rid of is maybe slightly less formal than eliminate, but it means essentially the same thing, and it's used constantly in everyday conversation. Recognizing that those two, eliminate and get rid of, share that core meaning really expands your comprehension quite a bit. You hear one, you understand the other.
Wow, okay, so much packed into just one sentence. We had contractions, ed sounds, the whole tu versus tuth thing, unreleased consonants, vocabulary, grammar patterns.
See, real speech is dense.
It really is. Okay, let's move to the second sentence the material analyzes. We have already announced over 500 reforms.
All right, and notice we start once again with
A contraction, we've. And it's just like, this is the reduced form of we have, right? Often sounding like we've in natural speech.
Precisely. We've already announced. See how the pattern is consistent? The subject changes, but that reduction of have to just a soft V sound that blends into the next word, it's very common.
So recognizing one helps you recognize the others.
It reinforces the idea that these are predictable patterns you can learn, not just random, isolated occurrences.
Okay, good point. Now, let's look at the grammar in this sentence. We've already announced. The material points out that this verb tense is the present perfect.
It is indeed. We have announced. And the material we're working from captures the nuance of why the present perfect tense is used here really beautifully. It's used to describe a past action. The announcing of the reforms is definitely completed, it happened in the past, but that action has a clear connection to the present or maybe even the future.
Okay, connection to the present. How so? Like they've finished announcing those 500 reforms, but maybe the door is still open for announcing more reforms later on. Is that the idea?
That's precisely the idea. The word already strongly signals the use of the present perfect here. It indicates something that happened before now, but is relevant now. The announcement itself is a completed event in the past, yes, but its status, already done, and the implication that more might come since the number is over 500, suggesting an ongoing process of reform, links it firmly to the present time frame.
Ah, okay.
If the speaker had used the simple past tense, like, we announced over 500 reforms, it might carry a slightly different feeling. It might imply that the announcement period is completely finished, done deal, maybe no further action is expected.
I see.
But using the present perfect, we've already announced, maintains that connection between the past action and the present situation, including the possibility of future announcements.
That makes a lot of sense. The present perfect connects past actions to the present timeline or ongoing situation. Okay. Now, what about the vocabulary, specifically the quantifier here? Over 500 reforms. Over has a specific meaning in this context.
It does. Here, over simply means more than. Seems straightforward on the surface, right?
Yeah, more than 500.
But the choice to use over instead of stating the exact number is actually quite significant. It carries a nuance.
Okay, so why might someone say over 500 instead of, I don't know, we've announced 523 reforms? What's the difference in the feeling or meaning it conveys?
Well, that's the nuance exactly. Using over 500 signals, first, that the exact number isn't precisely 500. It could be 501, it could be 550, maybe even 600, we don't know. Or perhaps the speaker doesn't know the exact figure at that moment. Or maybe they just don't think the precise figure is important for the point they're making.
So the exact number isn't the focus.
Right. The point is simply that the quantity exceeds 500. It implies a significant, maybe even an impressive quantity that goes beyond that threshold number. It's a way of giving it a general sense of magnitude while emphasizing the scale. It's a lot. It's more than this big number.
Got it. So it emphasizes the scale hitting this large benchmark number and going beyond it without getting bogged down in a precise figure that might not be static anyway, or maybe isn't the main point.
Yes, exactly. It's about conveying significance rather than mathematical exactitude. And you hear over, used this way with numbers all the time, over 1 million people attended, it costs over $1,000. Very common.
Okay, 2 sentences down, and we've already uncovered so many of these common spoken English patterns and nuances. Let's move on to the third example sentence from the material. And just a fraction of them will save business and citizens more than $10 billion over the next 5 years.
All right, lots to unpack in this one, too. Let's start with that phrase, a fraction of them.
Okay. The material explains that a fraction of means a small number or small portion of something larger.
Correct.
And them, that cleverly refers back to those over 500 reforms we just talked about in the previous sentence, right?
That's right. So the logic flows. Even though there are over 500 reforms in total, which sounds like a large number, only a small portion, a fraction of that large number, is expected to generate these massive savings. $10 billion.
Okay. The source material gives that really excellent, relatable example to clarify this. I know 100 phrasal verbs, but that's just a fraction of them.
Yeah, that's a great example.
It really makes it clear, doesn't it? Because 100 phrasal verbs might sound like a lot to someone who's learning them.
Definitely feels like a lot.
But compared to the total number of phrasal verbs that actually exist in English, which is thousands and thousands, 100 is indeed just a small portion, just a fraction. It puts the number 100 into perspective by comparing it to a much larger, often unstated, total amount.
Exactly. It's a common expression used to manage expectations, or sometimes to highlight just how big the total number really is by showing how relatively small even a seemingly large part of it can be.
Okay, a fraction of, got it. Now let's focus again on pronunciation, specifically the words of them within that phrase. The material points out the weak, unstressed sound here.
Yes, and this is absolutely crucial for lifting comprehension. Small, common words that mainly serve a grammatical function, we call them function words. Things like prepositions of, to, for, at, articles a and the conjunctions and, but, or pronouns them, us, him, her, it. These are very, very frequently unstressed and reduced in fluent speech.
Okay, so their vowel sounds change.
Often their vowel sounds become weak, neutral schwas, or sometimes they disappear almost entirely.
And of them is a classic example of this.
A perfect example.
How does it often sound in fast speech?
Well, of itself often reduces from dauber or down to just v, and them often loses the sound and the vowel reduces, becoming just mim, him. So of them frequently sounds like juval vivium, or even more reduced, sometimes just especially if the word before it ends in a consonant sound. So the phrase a fraction of them could easily sound like a fraction of am, or maybe even a fraction m.
A fraction of m, a fraction m. Wow, that sounds so different from pronouncing each word clearly and distinctly. It's like the sound in them just vanishes completely sometimes.
It often does, and the vowel in of weakens significantly. This happens because these words carry less important information compared to the main content words around them. In that phrase, the speaker is likely putting stress on fraction, maybe save, business, citizens, billion years, the words carrying the core meaning.
Right, the important nouns and verbs.
So the little function words get squeezed and reduced in between. Learning to listen for these reduced quick sounds like you or of and for them, rather than expecting the full spelled out pronunciation of every single small word, is absolutely transformative for your listening skills.
Transformative, how so?
Because it allows your brain to stop searching for sounds that aren't really there, and instead focus on processing the essential information carried by the stressed content words. It helps you hear the rhythm and flow correctly.
That makes sense.
Try listening for how native speakers say common phrases like lots of, kind of, sort of, a cup of tea. You'll hear that reduced of sound, uv or constantly.
That's really helpful, actively listening for that uv or sound for of and for them. Okay, now let's go back to the word over in this sentence. We saw it meant more than in the previous example, over 500 reforms, but here in the phrase over the next 5 years, it seems to have a different meaning.
It does, absolutely. In this context, over refers to a duration of time. Over the next 5 years means spanning the entire period starting from now and continuing until 5 years from now. It defines the time frame during which those savings, $10 billion, are expected to accumulate.
Okay, so the first over we saw was about quantity, more than 500. And this over is about time duration during the period of the next 5 years. This raises a really important question for anyone listening. How do you know which meaning of over is intended when you hear it?
That's an excellent question. And the answer, as it so often is in language, is context.
Context, okay.
The words that immediately surround over usually tell you which meaning is intended. When over is followed directly by a number or a quantity, like 500 reforms, $1 million, it almost always means more than.
Oh, more than. Got it.
But when over is followed by a phrase indicating a time period, like the next 5 years, the weekend, a few days, it's about duration spanning that period of time.
Okay, that's a clear distinction.
The material we're using provides other good examples of over meaning duration, like I learned a lot of phrasal verbs over the weekend.
Right, meaning during the weekend, throughout the duration of the weekend.
Exactly. And the other example was we discussed how to improve our speaking skills over coffee.
Over coffee? That one feels a little different. It's still duration.
It is still about duration, but it's duration tied specifically to an activity. It means while we were having coffee, for the duration of that coffee break or meeting, it's a very natural, common way to express that something happened during a specific, often informal event or activity.
That's really practical for everyday conversation, discussing something over lunch or maybe over a quick call.
Exactly. So the key takeaway is pay close attention to the words immediately following a preposition like over. That context is your guide to determining its meaning. Many prepositions in English have multiple uses like this, and context is always your best friend.
Context is king. Okay, let's move on now to our fourth example sentence. This one's a bit longer, and the material says it contains some key linking and reduction patterns we should look at. The sentence is, we got rid of one rule from 40 years ago that could have forced some dairy farmers to spend $10,000 a year proving that they could contain a spill.
Okay, a longer one. Let's zero in first on that phrasal verb near the beginning. Got rid of.
Got rid of. Now, the material points out, and you mentioned this earlier, that this means the same thing as eliminated, which we saw back in the very first sentence.
Good recall. Yes, it's a great connection to make explicit. Get rid of, or got rid of in the past tense, is the very common, slightly less formal phrasal verb equivalent of the more formal verb eliminate.
So you might read eliminate rules in a formal report, but you'd be more likely to hear someone say, we got rid of that rule in a conversation, or even in a speech like this one, where using a slightly less formal equivalent can sometimes sound more direct or relatable.
Precisely. Recognizing this kind of synonymy between a formal verb and a common phrasal verb instantly expands both your active vocabulary and your listening comprehension. You hear one, you understand the meaning, even if you might use the other one yourself.
Okay. And the material also emphasizes the connected speech aspect of got rid of. How does that work?
Yes, and this phrase is a perfect illustration of a couple of things we've touched on. Consonant and vowel linking, and maybe even some consonant reduction or non-release. In natural fluent speech, these three little words, got, of, often chain together smoothly, sounding more like got rid of, or maybe even got rid of.
Got rid of. Got rid of. Say those again.
Got rid of, or got rid of.
Okay. How does that happen?
Well, first, the final T in got might be unreleased or stopped, especially before the R of rid, though linking can happen here too. Then the crucial link is between the final D sound of rid and the vowel sound at the beginning of. Remember how we talked about of reducing to sound like OV or
Yeah, UV or
So the voice D sound at the end of rid connects directly, links over to that reduced vowel sound of. You get rid plus U sounding like rid of, or rid plus sounding like rid of.
Ah, I see. So the D sound isn't separate. It effectively becomes the start of the sound for of in the flow.
Rid of.
Got rid of it.
Exactly. Consonant vowel linking like this is incredibly fundamental to achieving smooth, fast, connected English speech. When a word ends in a consonant sound, and the very next word starts with a vowel sound, that consonant sound very often jumps over and attaches itself phonetically to the start of the next word.
Can you give another example?
Sure. Think about pick it up.
Pick it up.
In fast speech, it often sounds more like pick it up. The tut links to I, the tut links to I.
Pick it up. Wow.
Or not at all.
Nah, not at all.
Sounds like no tut all. The tut links to A. The next et links to A.
No at all, it really does.
This linking is honestly one of the biggest reasons why fluent English often sounds like a continuous stream of sound rather than distinctly separate words, especially to learners. Practicing saying these linked phrases yourself, really feeling how the sounds connect, helps your ear recognize them much more easily when you hear them spoken quickly.
That's another fantastic point. Saying it yourself helps you hear it. Pack it up, no total, got rid of. Okay, this next point in the sentence is also critical, and the material flags it as something that causes a lot of confusion for learners. The phrase could have.
Oh yes, this is an absolute classic, a major point of confusion. The material correctly points out that auxiliary verbs like have, especially when they follow modal verbs like could, should, would, might, and must, are often dramatically reduced in spoken English. The full sound of have, is almost never used in this context in normal, fluent speech.
Almost never. Wow. So could have doesn't sound like could have. How does it sound?
It commonly reduces to sound exactly like the word of, pronounced V.
Of. Seriously.
Seriously. So you hear what sounds like could have, should have, would have, might have, must have. Sometimes it reduces even further, especially in very fast or casual speech, to just the schwa sound, effectively sounding like coulda, shoulda, woulda, mighta, musta. The material demonstrates both could've, code A, and the even more reduced coulda, kede.
Could have. But wait, that sounds identical to saying the words could have. C-O-U-L-D-O-S.
Exactly. It sounds identical, and this is the critical point that the source material stresses, and that we absolutely must emphasize too. While it sounds exactly like could've, should've, would've, etc. in rapid spoken English, the grammatically correct form for writing and the underlying structure is always could have, should have, would have, etc., followed by the past participle form of the main verb, like forced, gone, seen.
Okay, so the sound is misleading.
Completely misleading. Writing could have, should have, would have is a very common grammatical error, even made sometimes by native speakers, precisely because the spoken sound is so similar or identical to the word of.
So when you hear someone say, I should have gone, or I should have gone, you absolutely must write, I should have gone.
Absolutely, 100%. Your ear needs to be trained to hear that coulda or could've sound and automatically translate it in your brain back to the correct grammatical structure. Modal verb plus have plus past participle.
That sounds really challenging because the word of actually exists and it sounds the same. How do you know it's not actually could have?
How do you know? That's the million-dollar question. And the answer comes down to context and your knowledge of grammar. From learning English grammar, that after modal verbs like could, should, would, when we talk about unfulfilled past possibilities, regrets, or past abilities that weren't used, the required structure is modal plus have plus past participle.
Yeah.
So when you hear a sound in that specific grammatical slot that could be interpreted as of or are as the reduced form of have, your knowledge of the grammatical rules tells you it must be the reduced form of have.
Because there's no such grammatical structure as could of, followed by a past participle.
Exactly. Could have forced is grammatically incorrect. Could have forced is correct. So your brain has to actively process the sound could have or coulda and match it to the correct grammatical slot. It requires connecting the sound you hear to the grammar rule you know.
Wow.
Listening practice, specifically focusing on hearing modal verbs followed by past participles in authentic speech, is really key to mastering this. You need to hear it again and again until your brain makes that connection automatically.
That's a massive aha moment for many learners, I bet. Realizing that what they clearly hear could have is often not what they should write or understand grammatically. It could have. It really highlights that gap between written and spoken forms. Okay, before we leave this long sentence, the material points out that it gives us the rather strange context for the upcoming joke we mentioned.
Yes.
This rule that was apparently forcing dairy farmers to spend $10,000 a year just to prove they could contain a spill of, well, milk, presumably.
A very specific and seemingly quite irrational requirement, right? It definitely catches your attention and makes you think, why on earth?
Which leads us perfectly into our fifth example sentence, the one that explains the absurdity. Because milk was somehow classified as an oil.
Ah, the explanation. Let's look first at the phrase classified as.
Okay. The material defines it as categorized or designated as something. And it notes the structure is usually to be classified as, followed by whatever the category is.
Yes, exactly right. You are putting something into a specific class or category, and the word as is essential here to introduce that category name.
You need the as.
You absolutely need the as. The example provided from the source material, phrasal verbs are classified as advanced, is perfect for our audience, right? It clearly shows the structure being classified as, and the meaning phrasal verbs are put into the advanced category.
And you couldn't just say classify phrasal verb advanced. It doesn't work. You need that as.
Correct. Classify just needs that as preposition to properly link the item being classified, phrasal verbs, to the category it's being placed into, advanced.
Got it. Now, the word somehow in that sentence. Because milk was somehow classified as an oil? The material gives a really insightful explanation of how somehow is functioning here. It's not just in some way.
Right. In this specific context, somehow isn't really about degree, like saying something is somewhat difficult. Here, it's used very deliberately to indicate that the reason or the method by which milk came to be classified as an oil is unclear, baffling, illogical, or just plain weird.
So it expresses the speaker's confusion or disbelief, like how on earth did this happen? It makes no sense.
Right, exactly. It adds a layer of questioning or skepticism about the logic or the process behind the action, classified as oil. It signals that the speaker finds the situation perplexing or absurd.
The material's other example using somehow, she somehow got the promotion, is brilliant for showing how this one single word can completely shift the meaning or feeling of a sentence.
It really is a fantastic example, because if you just say, she got the promotion, that's usually a neutral statement of fact, maybe even positive.
Right, good for her.
But adding somehow, she somehow got the promotion, immediately casts doubt on the process or the reason. It strongly suggests the speaker doesn't understand how she achieved it. It might imply that maybe it wasn't deserved, or the method was strange, or perhaps there were hidden factors involved. Maybe something unfair happened.
Wow.
It turns a simple statement of fact into one loaded with skepticism, doubt, or questioning. And this raises a really important question for you, the listener. How many other small words, like somehow, are you potentially missing or misinterpreting that completely change the speaker's attitude or the underlying nuance of what they're saying?
That's a really profound point. These little adverbs, these little function words can carry so much implicit meaning, so much attitude. Paying attention to these subtle words seems crucial for understanding not just the literal facts being stated, but also the speaker's perspective or opinion about those facts.
Absolutely. Adverbs of manner, adverbs of degree, even small conjunctions sometimes. They can profoundly alter the tone and the underlying message of a sentence. They're often doing a lot of heavy lifting in terms of conveying attitude.
Okay, we have really broken down 5 sentences now in quite some detail, looking at pronunciation mechanics, vocabulary choices, grammar in action. And now, we finally arrive at the moment the material has been setting up understanding the joke.
Punchline.
The final sentence from the speech is, with a rule like that, I guess it was worth crying over spilled milk.
Okay. Now, before we fully reveal the humor, let's just quickly polish off a few final pronunciation points from this last sentence, mostly reinforcing patterns we've already seen today.
Sure, sounds good. What do we got? Rule.
Rule. The material points out the 2 main sounds in this word, the initial or sound and the tricky dark ol sound at the end. Rule.
Yeah.
It's important for clarity to try and get both of those sounds in, especially the dark ol. While the ol might get a bit shorter or less distinct in very rapid speech, the full ol sound is generally the standard to aim for.
Rule. Okay, next one. Spilled. The material notes a difference between American and British English pronunciation here.
Yes, that's right. In most varieties of American English, the past tense and past participle of the verb spill is typically spilled, ending with that soft voiced D sound, just like we heard in ordered.
Spilled D.
Okay. In many varieties of British English, however, the form spilt, ending with a voiceless T sound, is also very common, sometimes used interchangeably with spilled.
Spilled T. Interesting.
But, as the material correctly points out, regardless of whether you pronounce it with a final D or a final T, this mirrors exactly what we saw earlier with words like don't and make and that, milk. In connected speech, that final consonant sound, D or T, might not be fully released with a strong puff of air, especially if the next word starts with a consonant, or it might link smoothly if the next word starts with a vowel.
So whether you hear spilled or spilt, depending on the accent, that final sound might still be very light or stopped or connected closely to the following word, like spilled milk might sound like spill milk.
Exactly, spill milk.
Yeah.
The non-release or linking is very likely. And the material also explicitly highlights this non-release of final consonants again in the words that, ending in T, and milk, ending in K, within this final sentence.
Right. So in phrases like that, I guess, or as you said, spilled milk, you might hear the T in that or the K in milk being stopped or unreleased. That, I guess, spilled mill.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It connects right back to our earlier points about don't make sense and the cat food example. It's just a really pervasive, fundamental feature of fluent spoken English. Your articulators, your tongue, your lips, they move into position to make the sound, but the full release of air doesn't always happen, or the sound gets modified as it blends into the next word. Recognizing this pattern is vital for correctly separating words when you listen to the stream of sound.
Okay, pronunciation check complete. Now, the main event. the joke. Why is President Obama saying it was worth crying over spilled milk? It's supposed to be funny, especially right after talking about this absurd situation where milk was classified as an oil.
Okay, so this is a classic example of what we call a pun, or sometimes a play on words, as the material explains. It's a type of humor that works by using a word, or in this case a whole phrase, in a way that deliberately takes advantage of its multiple meanings, or maybe words within it that sound like other words.
A pun, okay.
But this specific pun relies entirely, 100%, on the listener already knowing and understanding a very common English proverb or idiom.
Ah, okay, so knowing the proverb is the absolute key here. Which proverb is it?
The proverb is, "Don't cry over spilled milk." This phrase is the foundation. This is where the humor gets all its power. If you, the listener, don't know this established phrase and what it normally means, then the punchline, Obama saying the opposite, will fall completely flat. It just won't make any sense.
Okay, so we need to know the proverb. What does "don't cry over spilled milk" actually mean in everyday English?
The proverb basically means, don't get upset, don't get frustrated, don't waste your energy being sad or worried about minor issues, small mistakes, or things that have already happened and absolutely cannot be changed now.
So, things that aren't a big deal.
Exactly. It's advice to keep things in perspective and not overreact to small misfortunes. It uses the literal image of accidentally spilling a little bit of milk, which is annoying but ultimately minor, as a metaphor for any small problem or unchangeable past event.
Okay. The material gives the example, if you're really upset because you made a small grammar mistake.
Yeah.
A friend might try to console you by saying, hey, come on, don't cry over spilled milk. It's not a big deal. Just learn from it.
That's a perfect example of how it's typically used,
Yeah.
to minimize a problem, to encourage moving on from something small.
So the core meaning of the proverb is about not getting upset over small, insignificant things.
Exactly. It tells you to let go of minor misfortunes, things that aren't worth the emotional energy.
Okay. But T, in the speech, President Obama says, with a rule like that, I guess it was worth crying over spilled milk. He's doing the exact opposite of what the proverb advises.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that is the pun. That's the clever twist. He's taking this very well-known phrase, don't cry over spilled milk, that has a standard figurative meaning, don't get upset about small things, and he's applying it cleverly back to a situation that involves actual milk, which was, remember, ridiculously classified as oil.
Right.
And he's saying that this particular spilled milk scenario, this absurd rule, was actually worth getting upset about. Why? Because a bureaucratic rule that costs dairy farmers $10,000 a year simply because someone nonsensically classified milk as oil, that's not a minor issue you should just shrug off and forget about.
No, definitely not minor.
It's a significant, illogical, burdensome problem. And that kind of spilled milk he's implying is worth complaining about, is worth being upset over.
Ugh, that is really clever. So he's using the established cultural meaning of the proverb, don't worry about small stuff, and he flips it completely on its head to emphasize just how truly ridiculous and costly this specific milk-related rule actually was. It highlights the absurdity of the situation by ironically contrasting it with the proverb's usual meaning of a minor, insignificant problem.
It's a fantastic example of how understanding these cultural references, like common proverbs and idioms, is absolutely essential for full comprehension of real-world English, especially when humor or irony is involved. Puns and many jokes often rely heavily on this kind of shared background knowledge between the speaker and the listener.
That makes perfect sense now. You wouldn't get the humor at all just from the literal meaning of the words worth crying over spilled milk. You need the proverb context. Okay, Miley, let's quickly look at the grammar used in that joke sentence itself, the structure worth crying.
Yes, the material introduces a very useful and common grammatical structure here. The pattern, be worth, followed directly by a gerund. Remember, a gerund is the up-ing form of a verb that functions like a noun.
Be worth plus verbing, like, it was worth watching this deep dive, which, hopefully you listening agree was true.
We certainly hope so, yes. Worth watching, worth doing, worth trying. The structure expresses that the activity mentioned by the gerund has value or provides some kind of benefit that justifies the effort or time spent.
Okay. And the material also correctly notes the related and perhaps even more common structure. Something is worth it. Like, this deep dive was worth it.
Exactly. Worth it is extremely common.
And the pronoun it in worth it just refers back to the activity or the thing whose value we're talking about, right? Like, this deep dive was worth the effort or time involved in watching it.
Precisely. The it is a pronoun standing in for the action, watching, doing, trying, or the object, the movie, the book, the effort, whose value you are assessing. Both of these patterns, be worth plus gerund and be worth it, are extremely common and natural ways in English to express that something was a valuable use of your time, your money, or your effort. Mastering this structure allows you to make and understand assessments of value very naturally.
Like asking, is this movie worth seeing? And someone replies, yeah, definitely, it's worth it. Or, yeah, it's definitely worth seeing.
Perfect examples. Very common usage.
Wow. Okay, we have really covered a tremendous amount of ground today, just from dissecting, 5 or 6 sentences from one speech?
It's amazing how much is packed in there when you look closely.
It really is. We looked at common contractions like I've and we've, and how crucial their unstressed pronunciation is. We explored how sounds reduce significantly, like of them often becoming oof m or just m, and how to usually becomes tough, but sometimes surprisingly stays to. We saw how those final consonants are often unreleased or stopped or linked in phrases like don't make sense, got rid of that, and milk, and how that consonant vowel linking really smooths things out in phrases like got rid of.
Right. And that vital point about recognizing the reduced have after modal verbs hearing coulda or could have, but knowing the grammar is could have.
Yes, that was huge. And we clarified vocabulary like eliminate and its common synonym get rid of, the structure classified as, the subtle but powerful meaning of somehow in context, and the different meanings of the preposition over, depending entirely on whether it refers to quantity or time duration.
And don't forget the grammar pattern, be worth plus gerund, or be worth it. And crucially, we decoded that clever pun by understanding the cultural meaning of the proverb, don't cry over spilled milk, and seeing how Obama twisted it for humorous effect.
That's a seriously packed deep dive. Okay, so bringing it all together then. Why does dissecting sentences in this kind of minute detail matter so much for your goal as a learner of understanding fast, natural English? Why go through all this?
Because these patterns and features we've discussed, they aren't just isolated linguistic curiosities you learn about in a class. They are the fundamental building blocks of how fluent, natural English actually sounds in the real world. Recognizing that I have consistently becomes I've, that of them regularly becomes am, that could have almost always becomes coulda or could have. This is the process of training your ear.
Training your ear to hear what's actually being produced by the speaker.
Exactly. Rather than listening for what a dictionary spelling or very careful, slow pronunciation might lead you to expect.
So you're essentially learning to reverse engineer the sound changes that happen automatically and unconsciously for native speakers when they speak fluently.
That's a great way to put it. Reverse engineering the sound changes. By actively listening for and consciously identifying these specific predictable patterns, the contractions, the reductions, the linking, the unreleased consonants, you equip your brain to process that rapid stream of sound much more efficiently.
And you stop wasting mental energy trying to find the full forms of words that often aren't actually there in the sound stream.
Precisely. You start recognizing the reduced and linked forms for what they truly represent grammatically and lexically.
And working with authentic, real-world materials like the speech analyzed in the source material we use today seems absolutely key here because it shows you these patterns happening naturally in context.
Yes.
Not just in isolated, maybe artificial examples designed purely for practice. It also naturally introduces you to common vocabulary and idioms used in their proper context, like hearing get rid of used naturally, or understanding how over works for duration. And it makes potentially tricky grammar structures like the present perfect tense usage we discussed, or the be worth plus gerund pattern much more concrete and understandable when you see exactly how and why they are used in actual practice.
It really is a holistic approach. Focusing on these specific linguistic features, the sounds, the links, the reductions within the context of authentic content is, I believe, the most direct and effective way to significantly improve your comprehension of spontaneous natural English.
Okay.
It shifts your focus from trying desperately to catch every single distinct word to processing the connected flow of sound and identifying the predictable, recurring patterns within that flow.
Okay. So to quickly summarize the core takeaways from this deep dive for everyone listening, pay close attention to contractions and how they reduce sounds. Listen actively for those weak vowel sounds, like schwa, and even disappearing consonants in common unstressed function words. Train your ear specifically to hear how words link together, especially that consonant to vowel linking. Be aware of those unreleased or stopped final consonants. Don't expect a full puff of air every time. Understand that sounds like coulda or should've actually represent grammatical structures like could have or should have. Learn common multi-word verbs like get rid of and vocabulary patterns like classified as. Understand that context is absolutely key for interpreting words with multiple meanings, like our example, over.
Don't forget be worth plus gerund, or be worth it.
Right. Master useful grammar structures like be worth plus gerund, and always be on the lookout for idioms, proverbs, and other cultural references that can completely change the literal meaning of a phrase or unlock the humor, like our cry over spilled milk example.
That's a great summary. And the key really is practice. The more you consciously, actively listen for these specific features in everything you hear, whether it's movies, songs, other podcasts, conversations with native speakers, the more these patterns will start to jump out at you. And the easier and more automatic it will become to decode faster speech over time.
That's the practice pathway. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, we wanted to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something prompted by that strange rule about milk being classified as oil and the linguistic decoding we had to do to understand both the rule and the joke about it.
Okay.
We saw that understanding how milk could possibly be classified as oil required us to decode all these nuances in the English language, the sound reductions, the specific vocabulary choices like somehow understanding the cultural reference of the proverb. What if? What if many other seemingly senseless or confusing things we encounter in the world aren't actually inherently illogical, but just require us to understand the specific system of classification or categorization or communication that's being used in that context?
Interesting thought.
Whether we're talking about complex government regulations or abstract philosophical concepts, or even sometimes confusing human behavior, perhaps a lot of confusion stems not from inherent nonsense, but from us not yet understanding the underlying language or the classification system that's at play. Just like not understanding the linguistic rules and the proverb made the milk as oil situation seem utterly baffling until we decoded the context and the language used to describe it and joke about it.
That's definitely a thought to ponder as you navigate complex information, whether it's in language or, well, anywhere else. What system is really operating here?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for diving deep with us today. We truly hope this detailed exploration gives you some practical tools and, maybe more importantly, the confidence to keep working on cracking the code of fast, natural spoken English.